Ancient texts are usually pretty clear about the Great Flood. According to the records, it had one absolute, unbreakable purpose: a total reset. It was sent to wash away the sprawling violence, to purge the profound corruption, and crucially, to eradicate a very specific, unnatural bloodline, the towering giants known as the Nephilim. When the skies finally opened and the subterranean waters fractured the earth, it was designed to be a total extinction event, the definitive end of a dark era, wiping the slate clean so humanity could start over. That's the story preserved in antiquity. But as we open this explainer, we're forced to confront something deeply unsettling. A massive historical contradiction hidden right in plain sight, buried within the very texts that declared their destruction.
It really all comes down to one single paradigm-shifting question. If the flood wiped them out, why on earth did they return? After the torrential waters finally receded and the earth dried out, the giants came back. The ancient narrative is absolutely clear on this point, yet it's a paradox that rarely gets scrutinized. If the deluge wiped out literally every living thing outside the ark, including the towering Nephilim, why do historical records keep documenting massive beings centuries afterward? This is the central anomaly of these ancient records, and it challenges absolutely everything we thought we knew about the apocalypse.
To truly grasp this anomaly, we have to look at the intended eradication versus the post-flood reality. At first glance, the ancient story seems perfectly straightforward. The intended eradication was absolute. The giants perish in the floodwaters, the corruption is purged, and humanity begins again solely through Noah's lineage. The slate is wiped entirely clean. But the post-flood reality reveals a terrifying truth. Generations after Noah steps off the ark, the historical narrative suddenly starts mentioning giant tribes again, and we aren't just talking about one anomalous giant here. They describe entire thriving populations. This creates a deeply disturbing reality. The intended eradication of this hybrid bloodline was somehow compromised.
A lot of readers never notice this massive historical contradiction because the references aren't neatly packaged into one single chapter. They're scattered across different scrolls and epochs, but when you painstakingly piece them together, the footprint left behind is undeniable. We're looking at documented, thriving nations of massive beings: the Anakim, the Rephaim, the Emim, the Zamzamim. These weren't isolated myths or exaggerated metaphors. These were entire generations representing a widespread presence across the ancient Near East. The implication is staggering. If every living thing outside the sealed walls of the ark was utterly destroyed, where exactly did these massive tribes come from? Were they direct genetic descendants of the pre-flood Nephilim? We're looking at an impossible survival that completely defies the absolute nature of the deluge.
When you map this out chronologically, the haunting presence of this bloodline reveals a continuous, unbroken timeline. It starts in the pre-flood era with the emergence of the first Nephilim. Then there's a strange silence during the deluge. But centuries after the waters recede, a chilling resurgence happens when Moses sends Hebrew spies into Canaan. Moving further down the timeline, subsequent generations encounter colossal kings like Og of Bashan. And centuries later still, the towering warriors of Gath emerge to challenge Israel's armies. This timeline proves this wasn't just a brief, localized blip. This was a continuous, lingering shadow over ancient history, a formidable bloodline fiercely refusing to be erased.
Think about the psychological weight of this next record. When Moses sent those scouts into the untamed lands of Canaan, they didn't come back terrified of advanced stone cities or heavily armed human armies. They were completely paralyzed by the sheer imposing size of the people living there. They returned with a chilling report about the towering descendants of Enoch, stating with profound dread, "We seemed like grasshoppers in our own eyes." Try to imagine the paralyzing terror of encountering ancient beings so massive, so formidable, that seasoned, battle-hardened explorers literally felt like insects in their shadow. The giant bloodlines were undeniably, terrifyingly present. The texts don't just leave us with the frightened testimonies of desert wanderers. They provide physical footprints. One of the most fascinating figures in this mystery is Og, the towering king of Bashan. The book of Deuteronomy explicitly records a physical monument to his existence, his massive iron bed. The sheer dimensions documented, stretching over 13 feet in length and 6 feet in width, suggest a man of extraordinary, inhuman proportions. To put that into perspective, that's roughly twice the height of an average man. But what makes this historical record truly unsettling is how King Og is categorized. He's explicitly recorded as one of the last of the Rephaim. Notice the haunting implication there, one of the last. That implies entire groups, entire generations of these colossal beings had preceded him, ruling over kingdoms long after the cataclysmic flood was supposed to have washed them away forever. And the dark timeline certainly doesn't end with King Og. Centuries later, we arrive at the Philistine stronghold of Gath. This was the city of Goliath, the famous giant warrior. Most people assume Goliath was a unique anomaly, right? Just a lone giant acting as a solitary champion. But the biblical record reveals something far more systemic and disturbing. Goliath was not alone. The city of Gath harbored a continuous family of enormous warriors, brothers, relatives, men of extraordinary and terrifying stature. They wielded massive weapons and even bore anomalous physical traits, like 6 fingers on each hand and 6 toes on each foot. Once again, the historical evidence points squarely toward a surviving, entrenched giant bloodline maintaining a powerful grip on the ancient world.
So we have to ask the most crucial, unanswered question in this ancient puzzle. How did this impossible survival actually occur? Ancient traditions, rabbinical scholars, and modern theologians have debated this glaring paradox for centuries. Unraveling the anomaly ultimately comes down to 2 prevailing, highly controversial hypotheses: the Ark of Bloodline hypothesis and the second incursion hypothesis. Both theories attempt to reconcile the texts, and honestly, both carry deeply terrifying implications.
First up is the Ark Bloodline theory. The historical texts tell us exactly who entered the wooden sanctuary of the Ark: Noah, his 3 sons, and their 4 wives. But the text says absolutely nothing about the genetic ancestry of those wives. This theory delves into the unsettling possibility that the corrupt bloodline survived the apocalypse by hiding in plain sight. It suggests it was carried secretly, perhaps even unknowingly, within the DNA of Noah's own family. It proposes that a dormant, recessive trait, the literal seed of the giants, passed right through the cleansing, destructive waters of the Great Flood, simply waiting for the right moment to emerge again and spread across the new post-flood world.
Then, we have the second incursion theory. This ancient tradition proposes something entirely different, and perhaps even stranger. What if the dark events of Genesis chapter 6 happened more than once? If the heavenly entities known in ancient texts as the Watchers descended and corrupted humanity before the flood, this tradition suggests a horrifyingly similar corruption occurred afterward. It argues that the entities responsible for the first unnatural incursion actually returned to repeat their dark, forbidden sins. They deliberately bred an entirely new generation of giant hybrids in the post-flood world, completely defying the absolute judgment of the deluge.
Ancient traditions offer these different answers, but none of them cleanly tie up the loose ends. The ancient scribes preserved a dark historical anomaly they themselves couldn't fully explain. Whether it was through an undetected genetic remnant carried upon the Ark or a terrifying second descent of fallen entities, the reality remains unchanged. The giants didn't simply vanish from the narrative when the floodwaters rose. They returned, defying extinction again and again. Which leaves us with one final chilling question. The Rephaim, the Anakim, the towering kings of Bashan and the giants of Gath, were they simply the final, dying embers of the original Nephilim bloodline slowly fading from the earth? Or are they evidence of a much darker reality? Evidence that the great cleansing of the flood was never truly absolute. Evidence that the story of the giants never truly ended.